And welcome back to the Touchline Talk show. It is MLS Playoff Preview time. I cannot wait. This is truly one of my favorite sporting events of the year. It, in my opinion, and of course I'm biased because of the soccer side of this, but it rivals any postseason tournament in terms of entertainment value and unpredictability. It's March Madness, but you don't even have to deal with the bad teams and the teams that just, going in, 40 of those teams aren't going to even have a shot at making the Final Four. That is not the case in the MLS playoffs. That is just not how this works. But that is the best comparison. And of course, just this format, the way March Madness works, the way MLS playoffs work, part of me despises it, in all honesty, from a soccer standpoint, and wants more emphasis and respect placed on Supporters Shield. But there's a reason people in this country love the playoffs. It's because they are endless chaos and entertainment, and MLS in particular delivers on that front. So what I'm going to do here is I've divided the playoff teams, all 14 of them, into 4 categories. We've got Cinderellas, dark horses, contenders, and favorites. Cinderellas, I'm categorizing as teams that have no business winning this thing. I would be stunned if they actually find a way to hoist MLS Cup. The dark horses are, I don't think they're going to get all the way to MLS Cup, but I wouldn't be shocked if they make a little bit of a run. They are dangerous. I can tell you why they're going to pull some upsets. The contenders are the teams I can make a case for winning MLS Cup. And the favorites are the teams that I expect to actually, I guess I will say, make MLS Cup. I view the favorites on a completely different level, where I think they are a class above everybody else, and not just because of the way they finished. I have a very specific reason I'm going to get to for the way I broke this down. So, to start, we're going least likely to most likely, so we're going to start with the Cinderellas. I have 3 of them: Miami, Orlando, Real Salt Lake. Miami, Gonzalo Higuain has been fantastic, and that is about all Miami has. They've been hot and cold, pretty good recently. There's just nothing about this team's history, about this roster, that suggests they're going to be able to go and beat the best teams in this league 3-4 times to make a deep run in this tournament. Higuain by himself is not enough at this point to make this happen. RSL. Actually, I'll go to Orlando next. We'll stay in the East. Orlando is only here because the Columbus Crew can't hold on to a lead. Orlando has been really poor recently, kind of since winning the U.S. Open Cup. I thought that might spur them on, and they just fell right back down the Eastern Conference. Again, also, I don't see the difference maker you need. And finally, RSL. It is important to remember, even though RSL won against the Seattle Sounders last season, they did nothing offensively. There is no Bobby Wood. There is no Damir Kreilach. They have this ability to get in. They can win a game. I also find it hard to believe they're going to replicate last season when they defied all of the logic and found a way to make some magic happen. They just don't score enough goals. And I'm not looking at... If you had a Damir Kreilach and a Bobby Wood, then maybe we can talk about something. But I like last year's team better than this one, even though this team's been a little more consistent, I would argue. I just have a hard time believing they're going to go on the road and just knock off team after team. So those are the Cinderellas. Then we get to the dark horses. I have 5. Cincinnati, New York Red Bulls, Minnesota United, LA Galaxy, FC Dallas. Cincinnati's defense is vastly improved. Congratulations, you didn't get the wooden spoon this season. It is not good enough to go game after game after game and go all the way through to win MLS Cup. This will get into my philosophy, and I've talked about this before, and I'll bring it up again when we get to the favorites, about what it takes to be successful in a knockout style tournament like this. It applies to March Madness as well. You have got to have more than one way to win. And you have got to be able to survive the game where the thing you do great doesn't happen. Cincinnati is terrific offensively. The Vasquez, Acosta, Brenner trio is terrific. They can score goals with anybody in this league, which means they can beat anybody on any given day because they can just blow you away offensively. But they're not going to score 3 goals in every single playoff game. That's just not how the postseason works. That's not how the sport works. And you just can't rely on your offense being that good every single game. So you've got to be able to hold up defensively. Maybe they can do it once. I would not be stunned if they are one of the teams that goes farther than they're supposed to. Now, by definition, they're not supposed to go very far at all. I could see a world in which they even knock off Philadelphia. But the difference between getting there and winning MLS Cup is where I have my mental hurdle. I like them. They're just not quite there yet where they're a real contender. And they're also, the other part of this is that team has very little playoff experience, especially in the key spots. Vasquez, Brenner, Matt Miazga has not been in this league for a while. It's not like they're completely devoid of experience, but I want a team who has been there together collectively, and of course, this is Cincinnati's first run at this. New York Red Bulls. It's the same story even when they won the Supporters' Shield. Do you have the difference maker and the star power necessary? Because the power of the collective is much greater over a 34-game regular season. I'll get back to this point later too. What you need in the playoffs is you need somebody who can be the best player on the field. And I don't see that with the New York Red Bulls. It is also not shocking the New York Red Bulls have a history of disappointing playoff performances because this team historically, and this team falls into that category, have not been built to win in the postseason. Of course, the past few seasons they haven't exactly been, Supporters' Shield caliber, so it's not as much of an indictment on them. Again, can they win a game? Sure. Can they cause some problems for some people? Yeah. They just don't have enough to be a legitimate contender. Minnesota United. I really, really want to put them in the contenders category. What is stopping me is the fact that this thing went off the rails when Bakaye Dabasi got hurt. And not only did it go off the rails defensively, they have 4 goals in their last 7 games. They scored the goals they needed to actually clinch this playoff spot. But they nearly fell, more than halfway down the Western Conference playoff. I think they were up into 3rd at one point, if I remember correctly. They were flying. And then it all fell apart. I just have a hard time saying this team in this bad of form is going to turn everything around. The reason I'm putting them in the dark horses rather than the Cinderellas, their lowest seed I have in this dark horse category, is because they have done this before. Emmanuel Reynoso is that dude. They can beat anybody. I don't care who is in front of them. They have a chance. There's just too many holes to poke in this particular team for me to believe they're going to get anywhere close to actually winning the whole thing. But of those lower seeds, absolutely the one team I would want to avoid is Minnesota United. LA Galaxy. Similar to Cincinnati, my question is the defense, and simply, can you be consistent and pragmatic enough to actually win in the playoffs? The good is really good, the bad is pretty bad with the Galaxy. Now, adding Ricky Pooch has changed the equation to a certain extent. I now believe they can do this. There's just a difficult path, first of all. Second of all, I don't like their first round matchup. We'll get to that team in a minute. And I'm not going to sit here and say the LA Galaxy, who have been throwing away playoff berths left and right over the past few seasons, are going to all of a sudden get in and then go win the whole thing. Making it was an important step, and when a lot of teams were kind of fading, they did a pretty good job sort of keeping things going to a certain extent and not falling apart. That's about as excited as I can be about this team, though. I want no part of them if I'm LAFC. I will say that. We're getting to the teams. If I had to pick two more teams to throw into the contenders category, it would be Minnesota and the LA Galaxy. I just am not convinced the Galaxy are going to be able to control games and hold on to leads and do the little things you need to have success in the postseason when every kind of situation is going to get thrown at you. Finally, the other team I have here is FC Dallas. I know they've been playing well. I know they were great all season. They do have enough in attack with Alan Velasco and Jesus Ferreira and Paul Arriola. Where I'm scared is that midfield. When you look at teams that win MLS Cup, I'll just start rolling them off, starting with last season. Now, this was a little bit of an exception, but you still had Maxi Morales there. Keaton Parks was part of that team. There was some talent in that NYCFC midfield. And then you go before that, and we're talking about Lucas Elron, Darlington Nagbe, and Artur. And you go before that, and we're talking about Nico Lodeiro. You can keep going down the list. It is the combination of the elite attacking player and the midfield. I will not pick a team to make MLS Cup that doesn't have a difference maker in midfield. I need that creative force. And yes, Dallas have some of that on the wings with Velasco and with Arriola. It's not enough for me. So those are my dark horses, which means we go into contenders. I have 4. So 3 Cinderellas, 5 dark horses, and 4 contenders. NYCFC, Montreal, Nashville, Austin. NYCFC has to be here because they're getting healthy, because they won last season, because this group knows how to do it. At the same time they're getting healthy, though, that Talles Magno injury terrifies me. And it terrifies me because Tati Castellanos isn't here. Talles Magno has to be the difference maker in attack. And it's now hard to see that happening. Additionally, I just don't think they have quite enough to, and pieces are going out, pieces are coming in. It's not like this group has been cohesive. That's another worry of mine. I have a hard time picking repeat champions anyway as a personal philosophy across all sports. It's one of those things I don't think gets enough attention paid to it about how difficult it is to go repeat. This team was good enough to do it with Tati Castellanos. Bottom line, I don't think they're good enough to do it without him. Montreal. I have seen that this has become one of the trendy picks. They have been fantastic. Wilfried Nancy should win MLS Coach of the Year, in my opinion. I have 2 questions that prevent me from believing Montreal can do this. 1, who is your game changer? Is it Jordi Mihailovic? Jordi Mihailovic can be. Jordi Mihailovic also has not been particularly great since he got hurt and had to pull out of that U.S. men's national team camp. Beginning of the season, Jordi Mihailovic can be your difference maker. That is not who Jordi Mihailovic has been the second half of the season. If you don't have that guy, especially when you don't have an elite striker in front of him, I'm sorry, I'm not picking you to win MLS Cup. And the second part of this, which is what makes this really interesting for me about Montreal, is can they win at home? They are phenomenal on the road. If they can actually get to a point where they're theoretically playing road games, they absolutely can win those. I'm more concerned about the early exit than I am about losing in the conference semifinals or something. Or the conference finals, because they're going to have home games up through a potential trip to Philly. To me, they do the hard work. They are absolutely going to give the Union all kinds of trouble if that's the matchup that ends up happening and it happens at Subaru Park. I'm just terrified about a 2 seed that wasn't good at home. Home field advantage doesn't mean the same thing for Montreal it does for some of these other teams. So then we go to the Western Conference with my contenders, Nashville. I love this Nashville team. There is a reason this Nashville team shows up and does well in the postseason consistently, even in their short history. Defensively sound, terrific goalkeeper, big-time difference maker in Hani Mukhtar. Checks 3 of the boxes. They travel well because of that defense, because of the fact he can win a game for you. If somebody else could put the ball in the net and get hot, this team can 100% win the whole thing. I said before, I don't like that matchup at all for the LA Galaxy. And I don't like it for LAFC either if that's what happens next. But we've gone 34 games and nobody has developed as a consistent secondary goal scorer to Hani Mukhtar. One guy is not enough. But if somebody gets hot, watch out. They're one of the 4 best teams in this league if that happens. And I will not pick against their track record of success. It is not an accident. They are one of those teams that are built for these single elimination tournaments. They need something else in attack. Otherwise, I would have them among the favorites. That's how strongly I feel about them if somebody else scores. And then Austin, terrific season, terrific attack. Don't worry about them scoring goals. The defense, similar to Cincinnati. Now, Austin's defense is just good enough that I will consider the possibility that they can actually put together the games needed to go and win MLS Cup. They can get a good defensive performance or 2, and that might be all they need because they've been so good going forward all season. So that's why they are in the contender category. And the fact you're playing at home because you earned yourself a number 2 seed and these home games is another added bonus. They're going to be difficult to knock out in Austin. I also think that's what's going to happen, if I'm being honest. But the defense is the separator and why I can't put them among the favorites. And also, again, first playoff experience. This is a group that hasn't done this before. I'm always wary of picking those teams as well. Terrific season, terrific thing to build on. They've got a core of a title contender moving forward. Just got to clean things up defensively a little bit. And, I mean, all they need to do is take another step forward, a much smaller one than they did this season, and they're really talking about something heading into 2023. I can't go and talk about them as one of the favorites. Which gets to our favorites, and yes, on paper this seems boring because it's LAFC and the Philadelphia Union. Your number 1 seed. Couple things I want to say right off the top here. First, I am fundamentally opposed on principle to picking number 1 seeds. I pick against them actively in this tournament. Yes, we talk about the fact that Supporters Shield winners don't win MLS Cup, and it's true. Toronto is the only one, if I remember the stat correctly, that's won since 2011. The other part of this is the other number 1 seed doesn't win either. I believe the last time that happened the last time the number 1 seed that didn't win the Supporters Shield reached MLS Cup was 2009. I don't like picking the 1 seeds. But what makes this postseason so different for me is that I look at the rest of the league and I cannot identify a single team that checks every box and I go, oh, that's the team that's going to make the run. That team I don't want to play. That team can beat anybody. I can see them winning MLS Cup. I'll give you some examples and sort of talk about my thought process the past couple seasons. Last year, of course, NYCFC fit that category, fit that description. And you had the Portland Timbers and Seattle Sounders in the playoffs, which by definition, they are title contenders. They can win if they get in because they've represented the Western Conference year after year after year. They're not here this season. Then, going back to 2020, to highlight a couple points that I've already talked about and to highlight this one. I could not believe the amount of people who picked the Philadelphia Union to win as the number 1 seed in the East. Yes, I know they were terrific at home that season and somebody had to actually go in there and beat them. But that was a New England Revolution team that had gotten Carlos Hill back. They were dangerous. And the other part of this is, had Darlington Nagbe not got hurt, it would have been evident, maybe not Supporters Shield-wise. But my belief heading in, and I think the numbers back this up and the eye test back this up, when healthy, Columbus was the best team in the league. They just were. The standings didn't show that. But that was another team you look at and you go immediately, title contender. So year after year, there are these teams that are not number 1 seeds that I can easily talk myself into. They check every single box for me. And I have just gone through and told you my concern about every single other team in these 2 brackets. I have never been able to do that before. So I wanted to acknowledge that part first. I can't stand picking number 1 seeds in this tournament because they never win. And that's only a slight hyperbole. So here are my concerns, but specifically the reason why these 2 teams, to me, are head and shoulders above everybody else. I went back, and my story about this is going to come out tomorrow on Substack as well as on Medium, and looked at and basically built a set of parameters that the last 5 MLS Cup champions fit into, from points per game during the regular season, goals scored, goals allowed, XG, and, as I've talked about, a difference maker, a guy who was top 15 in the league in goal involvements per 90 minutes. And I built a set of qualifications that the last 5 champions have all fit. From the Sounders teams to Atlanta United to Columbus to last year's NYCFC. A bunch of teams that were not number 1 seeds. There are 2 teams in this playoff field that fit all of those parameters. LAFC and the Philadelphia Union. That is it. So that tells me one of the 2 is going to win. The math backs this up. And the other part of this is, okay, here's my concern about LAFC. I've talked about this before. I hoped Gareth Bale would fix some of this, and he just hasn't. It's been their issue in the past. I need to see LAFC prove, again, as I've mentioned before, they can win different ways. What happens when plan A doesn't work? To me, this is the best addition of LAFC in that sense. That they are built, they're as close as they can be to actually being able to do this. But I just don't know that they can. They need to prove it in the playoffs. When you give up a goal, when you can't score, when you miss a penalty, whatever it might be. And that's where Gareth Bale offering a counterattack, that pace, gives you another way to attack somebody. It's what I loved about that signing. It's all building toward this. Maybe he does play a key role, even if he's not starting. But he hasn't been a difference maker. And so I could see this. And also, I want no part of the LA Galaxy in the playoffs if I'm LAFC. And I want no part of Nashville either, and they're going to have to play one of them. Every single box they do check, though. I just would wish they were a little bit better defensively and not so dependent on controlling games. It's very similar. I think Liverpool is a good comparison. Not that they're the exact same team, but this idea that you are trying to control games sort of from the front, and you have a specific way you are playing. Because they've gotten a little more transition-based with Steve Cherundolo. It's not as sort of systematically breaking teams down possession-based as it was under Bob Bradley. But the core elements of that are still there because many of the players are the same. But what happens when that doesn't work? What happens when you can't score the goal? What happens when you concede a couple goals? Right? They are so good that they can impose their will on every single team in this league. The one game it doesn't happen, it tends to fall apart in the postseason. Just like you've seen with Liverpool. If they can't control games in the midfield and get the ball to their attacking players, they all of a sudden become incredibly vulnerable. The gap between LAFC and the rest of this league is not that big. It's not as big as I thought it would be. You have every right to go pick them and say, I think they're going to do this. Again, Supporters Shield winners just don't. But the Union fall into the same category. Here is what I do want to say about Philadelphia, though. And why I am going to tell you they are my pick to win. You go back to my core tenets and what I want in a playoff contender. Defense. One of the best in the history of this league. Best center back pairing, best goalkeeper, best left back. And a terrific holding midfielder as well. And the difference between this Philadelphia team and the one from 2020 that I could not believe people picked to win. That's a little bit harsh, but it overlooked the fact that they didn't have a difference maker in attack. And that Supporters Shield winners don't win this thing. That is what has changed with this team. Gazdag has been ridiculously good. And he has two guys who are scoring, 30-ish goals between them, in addition to his 20, and Julian Carranza and Michael Ura. This is an exponentially more dangerous Union team than the one that won the Supporters Shield. That was a team that was asking Brendan Aronson to be its creator. Now, of course, the transition, the pressing was a large part of that. But that was my mental hurdle, is I'm just not sure when push comes to shove, you have enough difference makers out there. Again, they were a team built on the collective effort. Jim Curtin says this all the time. If all 11 guys don't show up, we don't win. That's what's changed this season. When all 11 guys show up, they run teams off the field and put 5 goals on them because they don't give up goals. And they've got one of the best attacking trios in the league. And they showed up last season, and if not for COVID, they very well may have been in MLS Cup. And they very well may have won it, considering what NYCFC ended up doing. I sincerely hope we get the best version of this Union team. Because I wasn't entirely convinced they could do it last season. I thought they were going to lose to Seattle in the final. That was my prediction. I am 100% sold on this team. And the final thing I will say is, if this ends up being a Union LAFC final, recent track record for Philadelphia in Bank of California Stadium is very good. Now, they don't win there, but they play some thrilling draws. They will not be intimidated by that environment. They have had success there before. They have performed exceptionally well there before. That's all I'm going to say. But the math will tell you, recent history will tell you, there are only 2 teams that can actually win this thing, that can go from game 1 to the very end in MLS Cup and not have that one game where something goes wrong. And those 2 teams are the number 1 seeds. That is not typically the case. I am not the guy that goes to bat for number 1 seeds in this competition. It's what makes it beautiful. And what makes me, as a sort of soccer purist who loves the idea of a champion determined by round robin, infuriated every single season, because the best team in this league just doesn't win the championship. Rarely. But there are times where it becomes clear, like Columbus, they really were the best team in this league. It just didn't happen in that condensed regular season. We know who the best 2 teams in this league are. The question is one of them actually going to win? Or are we going to have to remember these teams' legacies and kind of go to bat for them because somebody else comes out here and steals it from them? But quite honestly, I don't see that happening. I don't think both of them are going to make it to MLS Cup. One of them is going to, and that team is going to win. there's my prediction. Thank you for sticking with my sort of soapbox TED talk, if you will. I feel very passionately about this subject. I did the deep dive, and there you have it.